Welcome to the Global News Podcast from the BBC World Service. I'm Uncle Desai, and on Thursday the 27th of August, these are our main stories. More than 1,000 people are still missing after deadly flooding along the Nepal-China border. We get the latest from Kathmandu and find out how Chinese authorities in Tibet are responding. Also in this podcast, a world first as a man has a brain tumour removed with AI-assisted surgery. And the 9/11 mastermind, Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, is scheduled to stand trial. More than 1,300 people missing, at least 350 dead. Thousands of troops now deployed to help in the search and rescue attempts. The situation in Nepal is by any reckoning desperate after Wednesday's devastating flash floods and landslides. Many of the dead were tourists and pilgrims. Information on what triggered the flooding has been gradually emerging. Experts now believe glacial collapse and debris flow was the cause rather than an earthquake. There are now concerns about possible second and third waves. Video footage shows floodwaters surging through populated areas with people fleeing uphill in terror. Entire villages, roads, bridges and power stations have been swept away. Our South Asia correspondent Azadeh Mashiri has arrived in Kathmandu and she sent us this snapshot.
This is some of the military support that is arriving at the airport. All the efforts that are being made to find the hundreds who are missing right now. And over here, there are families of those who are missing, who are gathering, who've been waiting for any information they can find. We just spoke to one woman who spoke to her husband at 8:30 in the morning yesterday and hasn't heard from him since. She's desperate to find information. Right now, aid is pouring in from around the world, and that's because there are also hundreds of tourists who are missing. Tens of thousands of tourists travel to that area every year. There are more than 150 Indian tourists who are missing, 33 people from the United Kingdom. And rescuers are struggling to reach some of the hardest areas. It's a remote area despite the fact that it's extremely popular. Now, what experts believe is that perhaps a glacier collapse and debris triggered this flooding. But right now, they're still trying to understand the sequence of events. And they also believe there could be a risk of more flooding because of the debris that is washed into the river systems. But there's also hope. The rescuers are desperately trying to reach some of these areas. Hydropower stations have been damaged. There are fears for the workers inside them who are still missing, but some of them have been saved. And so despite a lot of the fear and the anxiety, there's still hope here in Nepal.
Over the border in Tibet, Chinese authorities have confirmed 2 deaths so far. Our correspondent in Beijing, Laura Bicker, told us more about China's response to the disaster.
We cannot travel to Tibet. Foreigners are restricted from entry to that region of China. This is one of the most strictly controlled areas of China. So we are entirely reliant on information from Chinese state media. What they tell us is that 558 people are currently missing. They say that 260 of those are foreigners. They include tourists who were trekking in the area and those making that pilgrimage from Nepal to Tibet, to that sacred mountain. They also say that when it comes to the death toll so far, only 3 people have died and they've rescued 2. But there are major obstacles in the way of Chinese rescuers, the first of which is becoming urgent. All day they have been trying to assess the risk coming from a so-called barrier lake. This is a lake that is formed upstream from Girong port. That is the border area that you may remember was swept away in that dramatic footage in a wall and torrent of water that swept away buildings, lorries and trucks, and you see people fleeing for their lives. That is the central position for China's disaster area right now. But upstream, they say a barrier lake is formed that within the next 3 days there is a danger of flooding. That means getting rescue personnel into that area is becoming dangerous. Now, they do have about 140 rescuers right now searching for survivors. Helicopters have also been launched across the area, and the People's Liberation Army are at the border. They are trying very hard to get as much heavy machinery into the site to clear the road, to clear the debris, to get to where any survivors might be. But it is a very, very difficult operation for Chinese rescuers at this time.
Our environment correspondent Navin Singh Khadka, who's from Nepal, told my colleague Lucy Hockings that the sheer amount of mud and debris will make recovery operations very difficult.
When I spoke to authorities yesterday, they were talking about the water level that rose by 15 meters.
15 meters?
The water level on the river, 15 meters. And therefore they're calling it an event of hundreds of years. Now, the water is gone, but what remains, this is something that I have, covered in the past. That debris, that sludge is, that remains there, buried. So you'll see that 4, 5, 3-storied houses are underneath. That valley, that waterway is kind of like full of that. So that needs to be dug. That needs to be cleared. The question is, will it happen everywhere? I don't think it's going to happen everywhere, but they will try at least. It's going to be a costly and a very, very time-consuming effort.
And Nevin, what stories are you hearing from on the ground about what people saw and experienced?
Well, it's harrowing experiences, families, personal stories are very, very strong. I personally am very, very disturbed when I listen to people, particularly when they describe what was happening right in front of their eyes, and they're helpless, particularly when they are seeing their family members, their friends, literally, and then people are now showing me some of the pictures that this is where my so-and-so is buried. How difficult is that?
And what kind of infrastructure has been washed away or damaged? And I know we're talking about bridges and hydropower stations yesterday, but is the scale and the sense of that emerging too?
So, for example, look, there's this very, very important marketplace, which was a bustling marketplace joining Kathmandu and Tibet or other parts of the country. It's a vital highway. That whole thing has gone. The marketplace, the road, everything is gone.
The 9/11 attacks were the single biggest terror incident ever to take place on American soil. Now, nearly a quarter of a century later, one of the main ringleaders, Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, has been scheduled to stand trial in June 2028. He's accused of directing the plot to crash hijacked airliners into the World Trade Center, the Pentagon, and other sites in 2001. Last year, a federal appeals court rejected an agreement that would have allowed him to plead guilty without receiving the death penalty. Our reporter, Richard Hamilton, told me more.
We tend to think of Osama bin Laden as being the mastermind behind the 9/11 attacks, but actually, in the final report by the 9/11 Commission in 2004, they named him as the principal architect of the attacks. He was, before that, the head of propaganda for al-Qaeda, and it's thought that he came up with this idea of training pilots to fly into the buildings in Washington and New York and take those plans to Osama bin Laden. And he's very much thought to have been provided the operational support, selecting the targets, arranging travel for the hijackers. He was captured in Pakistan back in 2003, imprisoned in some sort of secret rendition site, thought to be Jordan, for 3 years, and then he was eventually transferred to Guantanamo Bay in Cuba in 2006, where he still remains today. And he actually said that he planned the 9/11 operation from A to Z.
Richard, we're on the eve of the 25th anniversary of these attacks. Why has it taken so long then to bring him to trial?
So he was first charged with war crimes and murder back in 2008. But the administration at the time of Barack Obama withdrew his case to change the law to make the process more efficient and less costly, which is quite ironic because it must have cost millions of dollars and taken, as you say, decades to come to this point. Then the trial was set for 2021, but was delayed because of the pandemic. And then there were plea deal negotiations. So last year, a federal appeals court rejected an agreement that would have allowed him to plead guilty without receiving the death penalty. And it took 2 years to negotiate that. One really interesting take is that the defendants were kept in so-called black sites and held out of the reach of the courts in the belief at the time that they could lead investigators to finding bin Laden. And one expert said the CIA was never interested in prosecuting them.
Still to come in this podcast, how bats could hold the secret to treating cancer in humans. A man here in London has become the first person in the world to have a brain tumour removed via AI-assisted surgery. Without the operation, 48-year-old Rhys Hibbert could have lost his sight. The AI tool analysed a video feed of the operation as it happened and advised surgeons on how to avoid crucial but hidden vessels and nerves in the brain. I spoke to one of the neurosurgeons involved in the operation, Dr. Daniel Khan.
The way it works is it's been trained on hundreds of videos by a big team of surgeons and engineers. And what it's been trained to do is recognise those life and sight-sustaining structures. So as we're operating, it sees what we see and highlights on the operating screen where these structures should, or it thinks they are located in. And so ultimately, the goal of this is that it assists surgeons in making this operation safer and also improves training for those who are still learning. So we're very excited to finally see it hit the operating room after almost 10 years in development.
And how have you and the other doctors been able to adapt to this technology in order to help it assist you in your work?
Well, we had a big lead up to this trial. So we had years of simulated studies, surveys with surgeons all around the country and the world. We worked with a team of designers and engineers to make sure that we get the information balanced just right. As you can imagine, the operating room is a stressful place with a lot of things going on. And so you have to be very careful when you add any new tools that it's more helpful and than it could be harmful. So we did a lot of careful design. We had a lot of safeguards and handrails up for these first few cases, and thankfully it went well.
And in the future, do you think that this sort of technology, AI-specific technology, could help with more kinds of surgery in the future?
Absolutely. It's already being used in some other fields. So general surgeries for things like gallbladders and I think even appendix and bowel cancer. So this is the first application in brain surgery, and I'm sure many other surgical specialties will follow suit.
In just over a week's time in Germany, a political party that wants to cut public funding for art it sees as anti-German and teach children less about Hitler could soon take power in an eastern state. Regional governments hold significant power in the country, including running their culture and education systems. And by the 7th of September, the state of Saxony-Anhalt could be under the control of the far-right Alternative für Deutschland party. Our Berlin correspondent Jessica Parker sent this report.
Germany's not known as a nation of flag wavers, but this display at an Alternative für Deutschland rally tells you something.
The black, red and gold of the German flag. One of the themes that the AfD is pushing at this election is national pride.
The party here claims that Germany's too consumed by its Nazi past, and that's frayed the country's confidence.
Der Zweite Weltkrieg geht uns nichts mehr an.
The Second World War has nothing to do with us anymore. That's gone. We have to look out for ourselves, for our times, finally becoming the German people we once were, the land of poets and thinkers.
Culture itself is in the party's sights. This local theatre, like others, is heavily state-funded, and they feel under threat as the AfD pledges to defund what it calls anti-German art.
This is playing with Nazi propaganda.
Really?
Yes,
You
I would
think
say
that?
yes, definitely. It's unbelievable that these phrases are put again in the same stupid way as it was before.
But the AfD are saying that German memory culture, they think it's sort of turned into a guilt complex. That's what they say.
You don't have to feel guilty, especially not born after the Second World War, but you have to deal with all of that to make it never happen again. That's part of our DNA in Germany.
German memory culture is a commitment to face up to the Holocaust and horrors of World War II. But in this region, the AfD wants schools to focus less on that era.
What do you say to people who would say your push for a more patriotic vision of Germany, in some cases
amounts to downplaying the Nazi past of this country.
It's the most normal thing in the world, in almost every country of the world, that people are proud of their own country, proud of their culture, their heritage. In this country, though, that's unfortunately not the case anymore, and we want to get that back. We have a diverse history, stretching back many hundreds of years, and we want to teach that history in its entirety, with all its highs and lows, but with pride and a positive outlook.
A party long accused of dangerous revisionism claims to champion a new patriotism. And despite this being one of the states where the AFD's classed as right-wing extremist by domestic intelligence, it's here they're closing in on serious power for the very first time.
What if bats could help us fight cancer and other diseases? Well, a group of scientists in the US believe they could. A major study of a species of bat that can live for decades has revealed some of the biological secrets behind its longevity and resistance to disease. Experiments on tissue samples from mouse-eared bats found that when their cells were exposed to damage, the animals displayed an ultra-efficient ability to either repair the affected cells or destroy them altogether. Professor Kate Jones is a bat expert at University College London.
We think that the ability to fly presents bats a really big problem because it's really energetically expensive and it causes lots and lots of damage to their cells and lots of broken bits of DNA. We think bats have evolved to repair DNA quickly, to suppress their immune systems a little bit so that they don't have a whole body reaction to having an infection. They have these antivirals which are immediately produced so that they can tackle diseases, in their cells right there and then. And perhaps we could use some of that information to develop new antivirals to attack viruses, for example. And the same mechanisms which repair DNA, destroy cells that are malfunctioning, are the same mechanisms that the bats are using to repair DNA and to clean out their cells. So understanding how they do that better would be really amazing way of thinking about tackling cancer.
The avant-garde artist Yayoi Kusama, who became famous for her colourful polka dot covered sculptures and installations, has died at the age of 97. She was one of the most influential painters of the 80s and 90s, and later one of the best-selling. But her career was marked by constant struggles with mental health, which informed her works. We heard more from Sian Cain, the Deputy Culture Editor for The Guardian Australia.
A lot of her art was driven by her experience with hallucinations. She experienced hallucinations when she was an incredibly small child. And so she was often drawn to patterns and sort of visual repetition in her work. And while she found some success in her sort of 20s and 30s, it was sort of nothing like compared to the success that she would achieve in her 70s, 80s and 90s, which is, called the Infinity Mirror Room part of her career, where she'd build these really intricate and amazing rooms filled with mirrors and often lights and artworks and sculptures. And it was actually something she first did back in the 60s. But it was something she revisited in the 90s, and it was something that really took off, I think, with social media, that people started seeking out her work in galleries around the world, just because they were so visually overwhelming, and certainly things that would appeal to, you could say, art lovers and also families, and I guess also people, Instagrammers and that sort of thing.
And that's all for this edition of the Global News Podcast. If you'd like to get in touch, our contact details are below. I'm Uncle Desai. Thanks for your company and goodbye.